In the name of Deputy Michael McGrath.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and I'm using this priority question to again raise the issue of motor insurance and the spiralling costs that motorists generally and indeed the business community are facing at this time, and to seek an update from Minister of State Murphy on the working group which is examining this issue, and specifically to know when will the recommendations be published and will there be a timeline for the implementation of those recommendations. Thanks very much.
Minister, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Cost of Insurance Working Group, which I am chairing, is examining the factors contributing to the increasing cost of insurance. The working group brings together all the relevant departments and offices involved with the process. Its objective is to identify immediate and longer-term measures which can address increasing costs, while bearing in mind the need to maintain a stable insurance sector. The initial focus of the working group is on rising motor insurance premiums. The core areas to be examined by the working group in this first phase are the motor insurance sector generally, at present and in recent years, the effects of legal costs and litigation processes on insurance costs, the current claims compensation arrangements and the cost of claims, insurance data and information, the impact of accident rates, the impact of unlawful activity on the insurance sector, and other market issues. The Cost of Insurance Working Group has met 9 times to date and will continue to meet until the end of the year. The work is being progressed through 4 subgroups, and these subgroups have been meeting on a weekly basis since their establishment on the 1st September 2016. The consultation process is ongoing by both the working group and the subgroups. These stakeholders include Insurance Ireland, individual insurance companies, the Irish Brokers Association, AA Ireland, the Consumers Association of Ireland, the Law Society, the Bar Council, Irish Road Haulage Association, the Car Rental Council, the National Transport Authority, and Tamoni Toski Naharan. In addition, I have invited submissions to the working group from all interested parties to insurance@finance.gov.ie. At the end of October 2016, the working group provided the Minister for Finance with an initial set of emerging recommendations. The Minister has considered these recommendations and I have discussed them with him. Since then, the working group has been working to finalise the report and developing an action plan to enable the relevant government departments and offices to commence the implementation of agreed priority actions. The report and action plan will detail any legislative or regulatory changes that may be required and will include a detailed timeline for implementation. From the emerging recommendations presented to the Minister for Finance and the consultations carried out since, it is likely that the report will address 9 key areas within the region of 40 recommendations in total.
Deputy, you have up to 2 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, thank you very much for your response, and I acknowledge that a huge amount of work has gone into this issue over the last number of months, and I commend you for your commitment to tackling what is a very serious problem. Can I ask, when are we going to see these recommendations? You have said that your senior colleague, Minister Noonan, was provided with an initial set of recommendations, as you put it, at the end of October. So when are we going to see those, and when will the overall report actually be published, so that we can get a sense of exactly what is being recommended here? And when do you expect that we will begin the process of implementing these recommendations? I know today the CSO figures are showing that month on month motor insurance costs are down 8%. Now, that could well be an anomaly. Very hard to read too much into 1 month's data, but hopefully it is a straw in the wind that change is coming. And I think the most important thing that you need to say is that change is going to happen, that there will be clear, concrete recommendations which, in your view, will deal with some of the root causes for spiralling motor insurance premiums. So if you can answer some of those specifics around timing, I'd be very grateful.
Okay. Thank you, and just to thank the Deputy for acknowledging the work that's been done by the working group. There's a very committed group of people who've been working behind the scenes and putting a huge amount of time in to try and address this problem, because it is such a serious one. In terms of the recommendations, so I outlined they cover about 9 areas, and there's about maybe 40 recommendations. And what was presented to Minister Noonan were those recommendations, then with the minutes of the meetings, as well as some background information on the consultations that have taken place. And at the moment, there's been a lot of work as well, kind of fleshing out in terms of research behind those recommendations and why we're proposing that. And at the moment, we're trying to put together what we think will be the timelines. I know when I met with the Finance Committee at the beginning of September, I had given a commitment to come back when the recommendations had gone up to Mr Noonan to explain the thinking behind them, to make sure that the committee was aware of what we were hoping to achieve, and hopefully to hear as well back from the committee's own hearings in this area, because I want to make sure very much so that everyone in the House is on the same page, that when we come with proposals for regulations or for legislation, that we can expedite them as quickly as possible. So with that in mind, as soon as the Finance Committee is ready to engage on this, I'd be very happy to come in and explain each of those recommendations and go through the thinking behind them. The intention is to have the report published in December, which will have all of that work around it. We've already put out the framework for the report, if you like. A lot of research has been done by the subgroups, so we are getting there. Really, the priority that needs to be done between now and then is making sure that various stakeholders are in agreement with where we're trying to go, but also then getting a detailed timeline, because not every measure will be implemented immediately. Some will take time, but we need to work it then to an actual specific timeline so that we have targets and we can meet them. Some of the recommendations, I mean, we'll be talking about work that's already underway and about expediting that work. Okay. If we look at the rollout of, say, for example, automatic number plate recognition, automatic number plate recognition technology, excuse me. That's already possible. It's about happening more quickly, though, and expediting that. Reviews of the PIAB and expediting that review as well. So some of the recommendations, as they're announced, will have already begun, if you like. It's about tying the work together. The CSO data is helpful, but we need to see a trend.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Yeah. Last word to you, Deputy.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Murphy. Can you give us the sense of the broad areas that are covered by the recommendations? I know you're not going to publish them now. Will legislation be required to deal with some of these issues? And most importantly, in your view, having looked at this issue now in some detail over the last number of months, do you believe that these recommendations, if implemented, will make a difference? Will they make a difference to the type of premium increases that people are witnessing and have witnessed over the last 3 years or so? Because ultimately, that is the litmus test. Can we stop these increases, first of all, and hopefully bring some degree of normality back into the market? I mean, I imagine your recommendations will deal with many of the key issues around the data gap, which is undoubtedly there, the issue of awards, fraudulent claims, exaggerated claims, and of course the role of legal costs as well, and court awards generally. So if you can just deal with that issue, is legislation going to be required for some or many of the recommendations? And fundamentally, will it make a difference, in your view, on the issue of premiums?
Okay, perhaps the Minister can reply. And the next is a similar question coming in. Deputy Pearce Doherty, you have 30 seconds to ask. The time is allocated, has gone out for that question and answer, so the Minister might be able to come back on this. Deputy Doherty.
Okay, but just before we start, can you give us an indication just of the time? Because I thought
you have 30 seconds to introduce, and then there's six minutes.
And then it's 2 minutes for the Minister, 1 for the Deputy, and 1.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll keep on going. Yeah, it's on the same issue, obviously following on from Deputy McGrath's, and we do acknowledge the fact that we're seeing some indication of a reduction in premiums. 8.2% reduction month on month is to be helpful, in the year-on-year growth is still 8.2%, but we also know that it's on the back of quite steep rises in previous years. So you've given an indication in terms of the 9 key areas, the 40 recommendations, some statistics. Can you let us know in terms of definitive date, what is the process here now? And it's gone to Minister Noonan. When are you going to publish the document? When are you going to publish the recommendations? And when can we see a time frame then for the recommendations to be implemented?
2 minutes, Minister.
Thank you. I mean, or Chair, if it's acceptable, Deputy, I have an official answer for your initial question, which is the same as Deputy McGrath. So if we could take that as read into the record, I could speak to your actual questions. And if I may just quickly address the issues that Deputy McGrath raised. Absolutely, we have to make a difference in this area, because it's necessary for businesses and for people and for a competitive, functioning economy. And the reforms that we're talking about will be widespread across the sector, the insurance industry sector. I think that's important. Legislation will be required in some areas. In other areas, we need to review existing legislation to see whether or not certain sections have even been commenced from acts that have been in existence since, for example, 2004. So there will be different things that we need to do. And again, that kind of speaks to the consensus I hope to achieve, so we can expedite that legislation and those reviews as quickly as possible. We need to bring clarity and transparency for the consumer and for the market, so that they could be confident that when they are looking for insurance, that they are getting cover at an appropriate price, and that cover will stand, and that they can see how the increases are happening year on year. They can see how those increases are being calculated, and they have more power as a consumer, not just to shop around, but to understand or have faith in the actual operation of the market, so that they don't feel that they are being unfairly penalised for things that they haven't done. And that speaks to reforms that need to be made around the cost of claims, the amounts being awarded, and the different resolution processes that are there at the moment. To answer Deputy Doherty's questions in relation to definitive dates for publishing, so we have these 40 or so recommendations, and I wanted to wait till I came back to the committee to speak in detail around each recommendation, rather than one or two finding their way into the public domain and people thinking that we're only looking at one area and not looking at another. So I'm more than happy to provide the papers that went to Michael Noonan at the end of last month to the committee. I can do that immediately. And I'm more than happy to come into the Finance Committee and discuss them at that point. And my intention is, we spoke about December always as the time for publishing the report, and I don't see a reason why we will miss that deadline. A lot of the work for that report has been done. That hasn't been sent up to the Minister yet. We gave him the recommendations. I suppose without a bit of context, I'll be able to speak to that context in committee. But what you'll see in December is a very detailed report with recommendations and an action plan with a detailed timeline as to how those actions will then be implemented.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I do welcome your engagement with the committee, and I think the committee has been helpful in relation to having a broader understanding and being able to delve into the issues surrounding the massive increases in insurance costs. And I think the appropriate thing is to provide the documents that you refer to the committee, so that we can have a full and rounded discussion prior to you making your final report and publishing it. And I'd welcome that to take place at a very early opportunity. You know, from my own position in terms of the motor insurance industry, I've made our own submission in it. There are a number of things that can be done quite simply, and I think one of the things that needs to be happening is that the Department of Finance plan to improve the motor insurance compensation framework needs to be implemented as soon as possible. This is one of the issues that has been referred to us both privately and at committee by the industry that will give some certainty, although they have some issues in it. There's also legal services legislation that allows for regulations, for example, that will give a greater choice to the claimant in terms of solicitors. The Courts Act 2014 needs to be reviewed and see if it's contributing to cost in the sector. And transparency, the buzzword which we need to get to, and I hope your recommendations, and I know what you've said, the transparency has to be central to whatever recommendations you're coming out from. From our point, we'll definitely work with you in the recommendations, and hopefully that they're substantial enough to deal with a reversal in the increase as opposed to just sustaining where they're at the minute.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, the committee has been very helpful, because the work that the working group has been doing has been happening in private, whereas the Finance Committee, embarking on this series of hearings, gave an opportunity for the Oireachtas to interrogate some of the information that's been put out in the public domain. Again, it's been put out in a particular fashion, or perhaps to speak to a particular point, but what the committee has allowed the public to see, I think, is the complications around this, and how there are different voices in the media, perhaps, that maybe don't reflect some of the underlying problems. I would like to appear in the committee next week if possible, but I just haven't had a chance to raise that with the Chair, and of course the Finance Bill is continuing into next week as well. But I think the earlier the better, Deputy. I think you're right. And so far as motor insurance compensation and the report published by the Government earlier this year, I have engaged with industry on a number of occasions already on that matter. We are awaiting the outcome of a particular court case as well, but there is a further piece of work to do there, and there is a recommendation that speaks to that in the recommendations. Insofar as the Courts Act and Civil Liabilities Act of 2004 is concerned, we have a number of measures around reviewing certain sections in that legislation, but also other sections which haven't commenced. Insofar as transparency of data, that's absolutely key. I mean, it's important for a healthy competitive sector. It's important for things like potential insurance fraud where it's happening. It's important for confidence for consumers. What I will say to date is that in the working group, we've been trying to get certain data from industry to drill down and to get a better understanding, and even that has proven difficult. So we are continuing to work with industry to make sure that there will be no delay when it comes to implementing certain registers or frameworks or databases that will only serve the public interest, and which already exist in other jurisdictions like the UK. So there should be no problem in doing them here as well. And insofar as the reversal of the premiums is concerned, what I've been communicating from the working group to industry is we want to give as much certainty as possible to the sector insofar as what the government plans to do. And the hope is that even before recommendations come online, that certainty will help them to at least put a stop to increases in premiums, and then as the recommendations work their way through, to see some of those costs coming down.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you.
I welcome that, and hopefully we'll get into the committee next week. The last thing I'd want to say is hopefully the working group's recommendations will deal with the problem that we're facing in the here and now. One of the first campaigns I was involved in outside of Sinn Féin was in relation to the Motor Justice Action Group, MyJack Group. It was because I was a young motorist myself, being charged something like £3,500 for insurance. This is a cyclical problem, and we need to ensure, and hopefully one of your recommendations is that the working group just doesn't stop working after this process is complete. We need a permanent body that will continually monitor this and need to ensure whether there's tweaks in other areas to make sure that we don't see this cycle emerge
Thank you, Deputy.
again.
If you give a 30-second or maximum minute.
You're absolutely right. And you know what you'll hear from industry is they talk about the insurance sector here in Ireland working in super cycles, which is incredibly damaging for the economy. That there be those kind of cycles being allowed to play out. And one of the recommendations we do have now, I do think it's in Solvency II, the ability for super cycles to play out again to the future is limited, but we do have a recommendation that will speak to a more long-standing commitment in terms of a commission that will keep this under constant review. But of course, the working group will continue to sit, I imagine, for at least the rest of next year, because we need to make sure, obviously, that the recommendations are being implemented to the timeline that we will have, but also once we're finished, or once we've done our report on motor, we'll move into other non-life areas, because that's also an issue of concern for the business community and others. Thank you.
Minister, thank you. Next